The presentation that Jamie is giving tonight on the new life is really the first of what we anticipate to be many presentations of this kind on Baba's life and message. These are programs that are meant to augment the already really excellent programming Dennis has been doing for the last 30 years.
Wow.
There'll just be times when presenters will do a deeper dive into parts of Baba's life or parts of his message. And so this is the first one, and Jamie is our first guinea pig. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. Is this working? Can you hear me? Good. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so any resemblance between me and a guinea pig is entirely intended. So yeah, and we're also, in part of this, the whole idea of this is for fulfilling part of what Baba had said, that people would come who loved him and people who knew about him and wanted to learn more. And so the question comes up, well, how are they going to learn more? And so Buzz and the board wanted to expand on all that, so we're starting with this. Let's begin. So many of you, as I say, this and many of these programs are, it's an attempt to address both just the need or the desire of everybody to just think about Meher Baba more and to try to, as he says, fathom his significance. He says in the discourses we should fathom the Master's significance. So we want to do that, and at the same time be cognizant that there may be people who never even heard of the new life. Maybe it's their first time at the center. So things are going to be a little bit introductory, as well as trying to broaden our way of thinking about it. So for those who don't know me, my name is Jamie Newell. Thank you, Buzz, for your lovely introduction, and welcome. And so for those of you, again, who don't know, the New Life is this period which ran roughly from August 1949 to February 1952. That's not the New Life proper, but I include the August because that's when Baba finished his 40-day great seclusion, which he said later that he pretty much decided and determined during that period of time that he was going to go ahead and go through with the new life during that seclusion period. So also I just want to say that what I have to say, first of all, I'm not presenting any answers. Anyone came here looking for answers about the new life, wrong place. But what we do want to do is think about these things, again, try to fathom Baba's significance and the significance of his work. And naturally, I have my own opinions, I have my own thoughts, and I interpret things in particular ways, and I try to make a distinction between what's an historical fact, and when I say historical fact means it's documented somewhere in a reliable text somewhere usually, or from the oral history that we get from the mandali and all that, and make a distinction between that and what I think and what's my interpretation and all of that. And Buzz has already said something about this Meher Baba Life and Message Committee, and we hope that we can do more of these. If you have thoughts about this presentation and what we're doing, what I do tonight, and also in future programs, feedback, let Buzz know, let me know, write a letter to the Gateway or whatever. It's real important for us to get feedback so that we know we're going in the right direction, we can tweak things and improve as we go along. So that brings up the question, what is the new life? As I say, many of us are familiar at least with the idea. Whether we understand it or not is another question. And as we'll see, that for me, I don't think that's even the point of the new life to understand it. But just in short, just to get us started, in mid-1949, as I say, around August, after the great seclusion that he took part in, I don't know how you say it, but after his great seclusion, he announced that he would completely divest himself of all of his belongings, and he was going to depart with a small group of disciples and live a life of renunciation, never to return. And this was a very big thing for people who had been very dependent upon him. And just for them, it was just completely out of nowhere. And the news of this was very abrupt, and it came as a shock to people all around the world. And especially people like Darwin Shaw would tell us that at the same time that he received word that they would never see Baba again, he would then get a cable from Baba saying, make sure that the drainage project is finished for when I come to the West. So Darwin said that he assumed that Baba wanted him to take both of those ideas seriously and just, go on with the work. But still, for most people, it was quite shocking. And as he said on the 16th of October, this is why we're doing this now, Sunday will be the 16th, will be, I think, the 73rd anniversary of the New Life. But on the 16th of October 1949, he left Ahmednagar on foot with 22 companions during a 4-month training phase, which immediately followed that departure. They largely traveled on foot. They begged for their food, and they slept outdoors in the open, often in rain, and they were traveling a lot in northern India, so it was frigid cold, and I'll get into a little more of that as we go along. So that's just a bare bones look. We're going to get a little more into it as we go along, but as we think about, and you're going to see, I want to avoid the word think, and you'll see why in a moment, but as we approach or consider Meher Baba's new life, I want to just suggest 3 questions that I'm going to try to approach, we'll say. So one is, what are some of the different ways we might reflect on Meher Baba's life and work in general? In other words, what's the context of this 2.5 or so year period in which Meher Baba's new life took place? It's in the context of his ministry, of greater work, and what is that place? How do we think about it in that context? And secondly, what are some of the ways we might reflect on how Meher Baba's new life functioned as an aspect of that work in that context? What was the function? What was the purpose? What was it all about in context of his broader life? And finally, of course, what we tend to think of when we talk about the new life, what are some of the basic historical facts? What actually happened? These are there's a lot of abstract ideas that Baba puts forth, kind of mystical ideas, very vague ideas that he says about the new life, but there also was a very concrete aspect. And we're very fortunate here at the Meher Center now to have a relic of that concrete aspect, which now in Meher Baba's house, the blanket that was with him continually through the new life is now on display in Baba's house. And Baba had said that he wanted it displayed in his house. So we're very fortunate to have that. But the new life was and especially if you hear the stories from the people who were there, it was very concrete. However abstract the ideas and the thoughts about it we hear, it was very real for the people who were living it. So, starting with that first question, how are we going to reflect on Meher Baba's life and work? Well, here's a quote from Meher Baba, which could end the whole presentation right here. He says, "It is absolutely impossible for an ordinary man to understand my work. With my universal mind, I work on an unlimited scale for the universe. To understand what I do is not within the bounds of human intellect. My very breath does this work constantly, while outwardly you find me doing nothing special. You cannot grasp the internal mystery." So, statements like this, again, that's the end of the program. We can't understand it. Let's all go home. But if we decide we want to go some other route, if we can't understand it, then how do we approach Meher Baba's life and work in general before we even get to the new life? Well, for me, and I'm going to suggest and share with you how I try to approach these things. Certainly we can draw many intellectual conclusions and thoughts, and we can put together sort of an almost mathematical thing. Well, Baba said this, and then he said that, so that plus this equals something. We come up with logical constructs about what it does. But for me, what I like to emphasize is the artistic symmetry and beauty of Meher Baba's life and work. For me, it's through the lens of this artistic symmetry and beauty that the transcendent value of Meher Baba's life and work can most easily be grasped intuitively. And what I mean by that is, if we look at a work of art, typically, unless we're an art critic or we're an artist ourselves and trying to learn craft and technique and things, we usually just let the work of art have its effect on us. It kind of draws something out from us. And it's the aesthetic. It's understanding the aesthetic of what the artist is trying to accomplish. And for me, when I think of Baba and his life and his work as a kind of work of art, and as him as an artist, as a spiritual artist, I can begin to open up a little more naturally to an intuitive sense of what he's doing. So I just suggest that we think about that as I go through the historical facts. That's just one way to think about that. So rather than being simply intellectual, I think it can be transformational for each of us when we can approach Meher Baba's life intuitively, and rather than do too many intellectual gymnastics. And again, for me personally, I feel that Meher Baba's radiant spiritual beauty shines through his activities in the new life when I'm able to approach all of those things intuitively and just let them draw out of me something that I may not completely understand. So, Meher Baba himself has said that his activities during the new life were the actions of a perfect seeker who ultimately achieved God realization through his own efforts. And I'm going to trace some of those activities that he had, but first I want to just give you another quote of what Baba said. There's many, many quotes where when he first went out on the new life, he did not really share. This would have been helpful maybe to some of the companions. And there were meetings, and who wants to come and who's not going to come. And even the meetings, he only sent invitations out to certain people. And he told them what the conditions were going to be, and told them that there would be, they could either say yes or no. They couldn't ask him for his feedback. They couldn't depend on him to tell them what to do. They had to decide. And all through the new life, it was on your own responsibility before God what you do. And he didn't tell them, though, that he was going to be an ordinary seeker going out to achieve God realization. This kind of emerged more and more through the new life. But this is one of the quotes that he gave at one point. He says, quote, "My old life places me on the altar of absolute godhood and divine perfection. My new life makes me take the stand of a humble servant of God and his people. In my new life, perfect divinity is replaced by perfect humility. In my new life, I am the seeker, the devotee, the brother, and the friend. Both these aspects, perfect divinity and perfect humility, have been by God's will, and both are everlastingly linked with God's eternal life." So that's all pretty mysterious, but he does pretty clearly say that he says it more clearly in other places, but just that he's putting aside he's said before, they put aside his divine omnipotent power, his divine bliss, and his divine knowledge, and in this case, just to go and actually achieve realization on his own. So if we think about what the function of the new life is in the context of his life and work, these are just, again, suggestions, and there are many, many, many ways, again, to approach it, to think about it, but these are some things that resonate for me. One thing, it was clearly training for disciples, present and future disciples, in the new life themselves, the people who there were many people who were in the new, Baba said, you'll be 100% in the new life, but you're going to stay home and follow these orders and do certain things. Some people who went, of the 22 companions who went with him, he, for one reason or another, said, it's better that you not stay with us in this context, but you'll still be in the new life, go home, follow these orders, that kind of thing. So that was a training for them. It was training for the people who thought they'd never see Baba again. And it's a training for us, who posthumously come back and look at Baba's life and work and try to learn what would, certainly I'm not a perfect seeker, but if I want to aspire to being a better seeker, what would my aspiration be moving towards? And he provides what I think is a supreme example of that. So another one is the new life as metaphysical scaffolding, and I'll say more about that later on, but the idea that Baba does a work in the world which is somehow enables him to do something in the metaphysical realm, something in another world. It kind of opens up a way for it to be easier for other people, something like that. So that's one way to think of what he was doing in the new life. Another example is that it was the beginning, and Adi Kairani suggested this, that it was the beginning phase of Meher Baba's dropping his body. Surely after the new life, he began to suffer greatly in his physical body, but it also was this sense of many people were completely, they had given everything to him, and he supported them. And there are many people, Vinod is here with us tonight, and he wasn't there during the new life, but his family and many people's families depended on Baba. They would not think of doing something without checking with Baba. No major thing in their life would they do without checking with Baba first. Well, now here Baba's saying, you're not going to see me again. You can't ask me that stuff anymore. You're going to have to depend on things on your own. And of course, that whole business of him throwing away the alphabet board and saying that people were going to have to establish interconnections, that also came after the new life. So this was sort of a beginning period of him separating from people he was deeply and intimately bonded to. And also it would seem in reality that it was certainly the beginning of the end of his being a vibrant physical specimen, because he suffered more and more physically after this. And finally, another way to look at the function of the new life is that it's a metaphor for all of us for death and rebirth. And I'll say more about that after we get into the concrete aspect of the new life, but there's an aspect of the new life which is, Baba says, we are now in the new life. We have no contact with the old life people. They have no contact with us. And this is what happens when, I often say, oh, I could never have been in the new life. And then as I get older, I realize, well, at some point, I'm going to go on to something else, and I'm going to leave this physical body behind, and I'm going to have no contact with all the people I used to know. And presumably, Baba says, I'll move on to some other life, in which case I'll have new companions, and I won't have any contact with the old companions. And there are many, as I'll show you, there are many places where Baba refers to this too. So there's an interesting way of understanding the new life where it really can represent death and rebirth. So, what did Meher Baba say the new life was? And he says it's absolute and perfect renunciation. When they were in Belgaum, and I'll go through kind of a survey through what they did in the new life, but the training phase was in Belgaum, and some people came and they wanted to contact, they heard Meher Baba was there, they want to contact him, and they said, no, he's in his new life, you can't come. And they said, what is this new life? And so the mandali said, Baba, what do we tell them? We don't know what to tell them. We don't know what the new life is. We just want to be with you. So, and it's true, they, even Donkin, in a letter in the middle of the new life, he was writing to, I can't remember who he was writing to, but he's writing to someone, he's saying, we who have been with Baba now for 8 months or so in the new life still haven't got a clue what the new life is. So, but this is early on in it, and he says, when asked by the companions how to explain the new life to others, Meher Baba said, tell them, hopelessness means renunciation of all hopes. Aimlessness means renunciation of all aims. Helplessness means renunciation of all help. No master, no disciple means renunciation of all spirituality. And remember, during the new life, he told the people, you cannot come unless you are completely obedient to me. Yet, you expect no spiritual benefit. I am not a master, and I am not, and you are not disciples of me. You're just, I'm the head of the party. I'm the head of the companions, but I'm not a master. So when he says no master, no disciple means renunciation of all spirituality, he took that quite, at least in action, very seriously. And the new life I have in mind eventually means absolute renunciation. Therefore, if anyone asks you what this new life is, say absolute and perfect renunciation. If they ask renunciation of what? Say of everything, aims, hopes, help, and life itself. Well, that's pretty mysterious and mystical, and so, but as I say, the new life was not mysterious and mystical for those who were living it. It was very concrete. So what was the new life in concrete physical terms? Well, in 1949, just as some context, World War II is over. Many people around the world were attempting to return to some sort of state of relative normalcy. In India, the Great Partition of 1947, which had divided the subcontinent into two separate states, India and Pakistan, and Pakistan as one nation was separated on opposite sides of the central subcontinent of India. This separation had disrupted lives throughout the country, and the country now is separated largely on religious lines. But I remember hearing, I don't know anything about the details of this, but I remember hearing Adi Kairani saying that more people died during the partition of India than during the Second World War. So millions of people died. There was all kinds of conflict, complete chaos. And this is the time, at this historical moment, and with little explanation, Meher Baba decides to give up all of his worldly belongings and depart on a life of walking, begging, and renunciation. And again, with very little explanation to the people who were coming with him, or to the people that he was leaving behind. Little by little, things emerged. But in terms of possessions, he retained only a few personal items for traveling. As I say, one of those possessions is in Baba's house, the blanket that he kept with him. He kept a few items for traveling, and two properties in his name he kept. One was the structure on Mehrabad Hill, which he intended to one day be his tomb shrine. And he told, all through the New Life, he told people, remember, because he was in very poor health a lot of times. Merwan tells a story of not having seen Baba for about a year, and when he did see him, he literally burst into tears because Baba looked so bad. And anyways, we'll say more about the difficulties that they all went through during the New Life. This New Life was no joke. And in addition to Mehrabad, he retained the property in Myrtle Beach, which was intended ultimately to become the Meher Spiritual Center. And there's lots and lots and lots I'd like to say about that. But if you stick around on Sunday night, my beautiful late wife and I made a film about the connection between Baba and the Meher Center during the New Life and his correspondence with Elizabeth. And so I hope you'll come Sunday and see that. And there'll be a lot more about just how that connection was maintained and established. So, elaborate arrangements were made to care for the disciples who Baba had been supporting, and meetings were held to determine who would go with him and who would stay, and documents were signed. Baba always had people signing documents. When they made a commitment to do something, he wrote something out and had people sign things. So he did this in Mansalimeen, he did it throughout his various relationships with people, and he did it with the New Life. People had to just sign. He had a document saying all the conditions, and someone just wrote yes or no on it with their name. And this was indicating just what people were going to do. So this was, these meetings took place August 15th through August 20th, as I say, sometime, not long, but sometime after the ending of the Great Seclusion. So the description of the group's departure often sounds, as I say, somewhat vague, as if Baba had no particular goal in mind, and he left, he didn't give a whole lot of details about what was going on. But as time went on, as I say, it became evident that he had a very specific goal in mind, which was to achieve God realization. And if you've read God Speaks and some of the other documents where he talks about the steps people go through in God realization, the final step is the annihilation of the mind, which Baba, particularly in the New Life, calls the mononash, which means apparently the annihilation of the mind. So he had this very specific goal to, as a normal human being, which Baba tells us, we have something like 100,000 human lives. And if we're lucky, we may get mukti after that, but it takes at least that much to get God realization. He was to accomplish this in a little over 2 years. But as I say, he did not immediately tell this intention to the companions or to the Old Life followers. But with all of this going on in the early morning hours of October 16th, 1949, this is a photograph. There's this wonderful book. I meant to bring these books. I forgot to bring them. But there's a wonderful book called Meher Baba's New Life, which is under the authorship of Bao, which is a compilation of many, many, many different sources. Jeff Wolverton worked on it, and a lot of different people worked on it. But Biff Sofer went around to all these different places around India where Baba had been in the New Life and took photographs of them. So it's a really rich resource. And this is one of Biff's photos of where they left the crossing in Ahmednagar on the morning. In the light rain was falling, and the 22 companions departed on foot from this Ahmednagar railway station. So this began the training phase of the new life, which lasted approximately 4 months. The training phase began in Belgaum, as I had said, which is somewhere south of Pune. This is where the Song of the New Life was composed, and where Baba began preparing the companions for all the rigors that would lie ahead. And actually, one of the companions didn't even make it through the Belgaum stage, which one of the wonderful things, and a lot of what we know about the new life is these beautiful stories that emerged, that Erich tells, and that we hear from Mani and others. And I'm not going to tell a lot of those. Some of them are in my mind, but because it would take many full college courses to really cover everything that was going on in the new life, just the documents. I mean, I skipped right over all those documents with the conditions at those meetings, because that would take more than the whole evening to kind of really delve into each one of those. So I'm not going to get into all the different stories, although I really encourage, there's a book, The Tales of the New Life, by Don Stevens, which is a transcription of audio interviews in the early 70s with Erich and Mani and Mera and Meru. And then there's this Bao book. The first time I ever read about the New Life was in The God Man. There's a chapter in The God Man. There's a big section in Lord Mayhair. But the most comprehensive is the Bao's book, Meher Baba's New Life. But I encourage you to look at the stories are very touching and very beautiful all the way through the new life. So after they'd been in Belgaum, they traveled by train to Benares, which is now Varanasi, and this is where the people bathe on the ghats, and you always see pictures of corpses burning, because it's supposed to be beneficial if you're a Hindu to die in Benares. So there's a lot of death there. But they went there, and this began the beginning of the begging and Langoti phase, which was still part of the training phase, went right up to about January 15th. And this trip to Benares was then followed by 12 days in Sarnath, which is a holy site connected with the life of the Buddha. And I think this is very significant for many reasons. And they call this Langoti phase, partly, I think, because Langoti is this piece of cloth that you see. Gandhi often wore something like that, and you see villagers dressed like that. Baba and all the companions had a Langoti, and they dressed like that in this picture that Biff took of the cave, where they went down and did some Buddhist prayers and did some things related to the life of the Buddha. And I think this is very significant, because this was followed by a period which was also very much like the life of the Buddha, because like the Buddha and his traveling companions, Meher Baba and his New Life companions traveled on foot, begging for their food along the way and sleeping out in the open as they walked. Having gone through this training phase, this is still part of the training phase, and this was referred to as the gypsy period, the gypsy life phase of the New Life. And they walked almost 700 miles from Benares to, there's a town, the name's escaping me, but it's some pretty close, but not quite up to Dehradun, where they took a train, and their final destination was this village of Mandri Mafi, which is just a little bit outside of Dehradun. So this took them from the 12th of December to the 12th of January. And in Mandri Mafi, this is, if you remember, those of you who saw Dara and Amrit, who were here just a couple of weeks ago, Amrit's father, Kumar, he never met Baba. They just, they needed, again, it seemed very vague to everybody. They didn't know what was going on, but Baba had planned ahead. He'd had Amrit's father, I think it was Keki Nalaval, or someone had been hired to have a building built where they could stay and be very kind of private, and it also was obvious that Baba was doing all this because he wanted to do a special work related to the Kumbh Mela, which is a cyclical fair where saints and holy people and sadhus and phony holy people and phony saints and everybody gets together, and they bathe in the Ganges and do all these different things, and Baba wanted to do special work there. And so he had a building built. Eventually, Amrit's father, Kumar, had prepared the buildings for Baba, and this is where he stayed from January 12th to June 14th, 1950. And on January 15th, 1950, this was, again, they'd been through all this phase, and already Baba was realizing that it was very, very rigorous and very, very difficult, and not only was not everybody able to keep up with the new life, but they were slowing him down. See, the reason he took all these people wasn't because he wanted them with him, particularly. It was because he had this compassion, and he, particularly with Mara, he certainly didn't want to tell Mara he was never going to see her again and leave. She would have just been very upset. And my personal opinion is that he had Mani and Goher and Meru to be there as companions for Mara, so that she wasn't alone during all this work that he was doing and all these things. So in any case, this was the beginning of the labor phase, but it was also the beginning of sort of weeding away some of the companions, and kind of letting the companions know that they had an off-ramp. There was a way to get out of the new life and still be in the new life, and still have, they were still a yes walla, as Baba called them, but they didn't have to necessarily go through the incredible rigors that he was wanting to engage in. And already, because of his compassion for them, it was holding him back. So he came out with these new plans. Again, we could do a whole evening on these plans, very complex. Plan 1, Plan 1A, Plan 1B, Plan 1C, and on and on and on. I'm not going to get into all the details of those. For one thing, I could never remember them all. But referring to these new plans, Baba said, "These plans make me free to live the new life in my own way, and yet keep you all 100% in the new life." And he mentioned on another occasion that it was his compassion for his companions was making it very difficult for him to fulfill his oath. Part of the process when they started on the new life was for him to take an oath. All the companions took an oath that they were going to stick to the new life, they were going to live the new life all the way. And he was saying, it's hard for me to fulfill my oath because of my compassion for the companions, and I don't want to just cast them aside. At the same time, they're holding me back. So, moving on, Baba was still at Mandri Mafi when he traveled to the Kumbh Mela in Hardwar, and he had a little hut built or hired in Motichur, or Motichar, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but a small town just a walking distance, but a long walking distance from where the main center of the Kumbh Mela was. And during that time, from April 1950, from March 1950 to April 1950, Baba contacted and bowed down to 10,000, and he bowed down to these people. He didn't just, he would contact, he didn't just shake their hands or something. He would often bow down and just take off. On one occasion, he bowed down to someone who was a rather prominent person, and he was such a hurry to go to the next one. The person offered him prasad, and he didn't take the prasad. And then, like later in the afternoon, he said, "Erich, I should have taken that prasad. You know, can you go back and tell that man I'm sorry and get the prasad?" And Erich did, and the man was happy, and he found him and he got the prasad, and Baba distributed the prasad to the people. But this was how intent he was to contact so many people. Boom, 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 boom. Pendu's job was to count how many people he was bowing down to. And when Pendu informed Baba that they had reached the number of 10,000, Baba said, "Okay, we can go back to Mandri Mafi, my work is done." So again, I'm not going to try to understand that part intellectually. Although many people have suggested, including Goher and others, that Baba's excruciating pain in his neck later in his life began during that period of bowing down 10,000 times. And he, throughout his life, he continued to bow down to musts, and this was just something that it was a part of his work that he did. I should also say that Baba said very specifically and clearly, he did a lot of must work during the new life, and he did a lot of this kind of work with the poor and bowing down to saints and all that. He said it was completely qualitatively different, the work that he was doing in the new life of working with musts and working with poor people and working with the sadhus and what have you, than what he did in the old life. He said it was completely different, it had a different purpose, and it was not the same work. Again, he didn't go into too much detail about why that was so, but it was true. But this period, their stay in North India was a time of extreme suffering and difficulty. As I said, it's very, very cold up there. And of course, the mandali were used to Ahmednagar, which is most of the year very, very hot, very, very dry. And here they work up in the morning and there's ice everywhere. They couldn't get water sometimes to make tea because the buckets were ice, frozen with ice. Baba's Kumbh Mela work, bowing down to over 10,000 people, had caused him extreme neck and back pain. He also contracted a painful eye infection. He had various illnesses that he would kind of cycle through. And at one point, he even came down with the mumps. He had a severe case of the mumps. Again, not being used to the extremely cold climate, several of the companions suffered a variety of illnesses, which they all had difficulty recovering from. Many of them, there was a different story, and all of it was like one of the most, hardy. He'd do anything for Baba, and there's various periods when they say he just couldn't get out of his bed. Ghani had a couple of heart attacks. Kakabaria had a heart attack. And again, they're sleeping out in the cold, and sometimes it would rain, and they had those. It was tough, they were sleeping outside. It's freezing cold and it's raining, and good luck. Get some wood and make a fire. That's all you can do. And then Baba's sister Mani also contracted food poisoning, and despite his own ill health, Baba, took great pains to care for her and nurse her back to health. So on June 14th, 1950, Baba transferred the party to Satara in South India, where they stayed throughout the monsoon period, shifting to Mahabaleshwar on October 1st, 1950. Now, this is also interesting, just in terms of the life of the Buddha, because when you read the Buddhist texts, this is what the Buddha did. The Buddha traveled around begging, sleeping out in the open. Sometimes people would offer him a place to stay for some period of time, but mostly he kept traveling and he kept moving and kept begging. And then they say, and then during the rainy season, they would find a place and they would stay there during the rainy season. And when in India now, we don't call it the rainy season, we call it the monsoon period. And Baba, during the monsoon, like the Buddha, he found a place in Satara, and which was, it's a hill station, so it's not as hot as Nagar and other places, but it was not nearly as cold as Dehradun in North India. And then later he shifted to Mahabaleshwar on October 1st, 1950. Now in 1 year, so they've done this for 1 year. In October 16th, 1950, Baba said he stepped out of the new life and back into the old life for 4 hours, and met with a large group of male disciples. And these are photos of that meeting in Mahabaleshwar. And after this meeting, on October 21st, 1950, Baba left for a 6-week tour of India, contacting sadhus and saints and working with musts and the poor throughout India, traveling to Nepal and Calcutta, among other places. And remember, like I said, he said this was qualitatively different from the kind of work. He would do that kind of work normally. And Iris said, for me, it was a new life or not new life. It was the same for me. I just did whatever Baba said. He's doing this work with the musts. Yes, Baba, whatever. It didn't make much difference to him, except that there were certain conditions about being cheerful and all that, and he had to be more careful. But Baba said this was very different work, even though it was similar to what he'd done before. Now this picture is actually him bowing down to old life companions. These are actually the Sid who was in there, and I forget all the other, I think Bhagirath Tiwari and some other people are in this series of pictures, but it just illustrates the kind of work that he would do. Again, I'm not sure why he was doing that with these people, but this was during the new life, this photo. And then from November 25th to December 6th, 1950, Baba worked with musts and the poor in Bombay. From late December to January, Baba worked with musts in Hyderabad. And then late January 1950, he resumed his must work in Bombay. Now, just as before he began the new life, he did a 40-day seclusion, which he called the Great Seclusion. Well, others called the Great Seclusion. He did that prior to deciding that he was going to go out on the new life. Now, he was going to do another seclusion, but an even longer seclusion. This was a 100-day seclusion, which preceded his mononash work, which was to be the culmination. Again, this is something that he told other people until it happened, but as it turns out, the mononash was the culmination of the new life. And before doing that, he had a 100-day seclusion that lasted from February 13th, 1951 to May 24th, 1951. And the evening before his seclusion began, he offered a prayer asking for God's help in achieving this upcoming work. And this is a photo of him doing that prayer, asking for God's help for the Mononash. And I should mention that when they had those first meetings, Baba did a similar thing where he began asking God for help and asking for God's forgiveness. And this was absolutely stunning to all the people there, because for them, Baba was God, and they'd spent their lives kind of working out the fact for them that he was their master and he was God in human form. And now all of a sudden he's asking, they'd never heard of Baba asking God for help, but throughout the new life, this is what he was doing. And of course, this being a particularly big thing. So after that 100-day seclusion, which again, many, many amazing and wonderful stories about that seclusion, which I'm just kind of going right over, but just to kind of give you a grand sweep of the extraordinary amount of intense work, and again, for me, just radiant spiritual integrity and spiritual beauty in Meher Baba's behavior during this whole period. Really complete integrity to his purpose and to his commitment to being a normal person, working very, very hard to achieve God realization. And one would assume that he did that ultimately for our benefit. So this sort of, both this example and some sort of metaphysical work was done to make this sort of thing easier for us. Now, after that great seclusion and before he officially began the Mononash, he had yet another gathering where he had the old and new life companions all gathered together. I should have written this down. I believe it was in Hyderabad. I'm not sure, but this is a photo from that gathering there. So then the Mononash officially began on June 30th. Then this first period went from June 30th to November 7th, 1951. And then the final days, the final months, I should say, the 4 months of really intense Mononash work, which Baba put particular emphasis on. And as you'll see, if you see the film, he also connected that work with the work he did. He said the work he did on this final 4 months of Mononash would manifest in the Western world if he had his 2 weeks of seclusion in the United States. And he accomplished those 2 weeks of seclusion when he arrived at his house in Myrtle Beach and stayed in seclusion at Baba's house in Myrtle Beach for 2 weeks. And that, he said, would some way or other manifest his Mononash work in the Western world. Yeah, and there's more about that, as I say, in the film that will be on Sunday, I mean. So after completing, this is the only companions that made it all the way through, with Gustaji on Baba's right, then Bidal right behind him, Pendu, and Erich. They're the ones who made it all the way through. And you could say that the ladies did too, but he sent them back to Merazad, and I'm sure they breathed a sigh of relief. And he did a lot of the final Mononash work, some on Seclusion Hill, some in the back area, and he also went to Pune, and there was a lot of different, very, very interesting things. But when it was all said and done, and when he finished the final 4 months of the Mononash work, Baba said, "To sum up my Mononash work in short, I feel in all truth that the 4 months Mononash work has been done by me by the help of God to my entire satisfaction. Number 2, and this is Baba's own list with the numbers and everything, the result of this work must bear fruit sooner or later, either in the immediate present or sometime later or in the distant future. 3, the result will bring freedom to us all in proportion to our merits of love, faith, and service. And 4, this freedom will be freedom from ignorance and will be the knowledge that we always were, are, and will be one with God." So to me, what he's describing is just in the same way that he's a little vague with saying what Mononash is, but it means God realization. It means the annihilation of mind, which when that happens, we become aware of our identity with God. And what he's saying here also is that his work in Mononash will bring freedom to us all, means bring the same state to us all. That's my reading of it. And then 5, this knowledge will make us realize and experience infinite love, power, bliss, and peace, which we always possessed and knew not of. So again, this all, to me, clearly says that his Mononash work is for all of us to achieve this state, but according to our merits of love, faith, and service. So The completion of Meher Baba's monadized work effectively brought to a close the main phase of Meher Baba's new life. And it could be very complicated to nuance that, because he said the new life will live forever and all that, but he did not, thankfully, from the Mandali's point of view, he did not continue to do the gypsy life or the beggar life or any of that stuff. He went back to Meherazad, but he said that he would be living both the new life and his old life now were merged simultaneously. So he was fully God as he had been in the old life, but he also was fully 100% in the new life, which would continue on forever, even if there was no one left to live it. So I want to review just some of what I had said about some of my own reflections on the functions of the new life in the context of Baba's life and work. Because you can see, and Baba said, the Arabs said that they never reflected on the new life, but they were too busy. Baba needed a cup of this, he needed that. There was no time to think what the philosophical or metaphysical ramifications of all this were. It was just do what Baba said, or they're great. The only fear they had throughout the new life from every companion that I've heard any reports from was that Baba would send them away. All they wanted was to be with Baba. That was it. And anything else, whatever the deprivation, sleeping in the rain, not a problem. Just don't send me away. That was their attitude. So there's the new life as training for disciples, present and future. And I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Anyone who wishes to live a life of integrity, of purity and humility can learn much from studying Baba's new life. As he has said, my new life makes me take the stand of a humble servant of God and his people. In my new life, perfect divinity is replaced by perfect humility. In my new life, I am the seeker, the devotee, the brother, and the friend. So if we're interested in that kind of a life and aspire to that, good luck trying to do it the way Baba did. But it certainly is. See, if you take the lives of many avatars, Jesus, of course, you can't really be the Son of God. With the Prophet in Islam, it seems to me that the whole sort of mission of the avatar in the life of the Prophet was to provide an example for humanity. In Baba's life, because we take him to be God in human form, it's really hard for us to see him as God in human form and say, well, I want to be like that. Well, obviously, if we are God in human form, we may be God in human form, but we're not aware of it. But he gives us an example of how we could behave if we wanted to align ourselves with him in this 2.5, whatever it is, year period of the new life. He gives us a perfect example of how we might begin to learn to have more integrity, more purity, more humility, that sort of thing. The second one I mentioned was the idea of the new life as metaphysical scaffolding. Baba has said that the outer work that he does in the world is essentially a framework that he uses to accomplish some kind of work in the inner world. And a very nice quote that he gives us from 1926 when he was at Meherabad. After creating a number of schools and projects for the poor, there was really a small city had grown up there, and people were coming regularly every week. There were big, whenever there was some festival or some holiday, they would have big celebrations, and more people would come, and people would come from Pune, people would come from Bombay. And then one day Baba just surprised the Mandali, much the way he did with the New Life, and said, it's time to dismantle everything and close it all up. Just tear down all the schools. And everybody's kind of like, but Baba, this could really amount to something. And Baba's saying, yeah, so the work's already done. And he said, quote, all these are just the scaffolding for my work, and the scaffolding is unnecessary once the actual building is completed. And that's a quote from Lord Mayor. So maybe the New Life is that sort of thing where he was doing some sort of inner work, and that work was completed as he describes it in that list I just read, and he didn't need to continue to be begging. He wasn't begging and doing. It often said that he wasn't going into seclusion or fasting for himself. He was doing it for others, and it seems that, to me, that something like that may well have been going on with the New Life. So third thing I was suggesting was that the New Life was the beginning phase of Meher Baba's dropping the body. And many, many people had become, as I said, dependent on Baba for everything. One function of the new life could easily be seen as a way to begin to get people used to the idea that he would not always be around physically, he could not always do everything for them, they could not count on him to tell them, you should study this in school, you should go for that career, that sort of thing, which typically, it's unbelievable how many people Baba had this kind of relationship with. I say unbelievable, but many of us have all talked to people who had Baba that intimately in their lives, and not just mandali, just people emerge out of the woodwork as the mandali have been gone. We find more and more people that we learned we didn't even know that had all these intimate relationships with Baba. So Baba divested himself not only of all worldly goods and material wealth, but also of the responsibility to micromanage the daily lives of many of his followers. And Adi Kairani emphasizes this in his talks on the new life. And it's also true, as I said, that after the new life, his 2 automobile accidents greatly increased his suffering and very likely, just say pretty definitely, decreased his own lifespan. And so it seems like there was a breaking of ties. And in 1954, he emphasized more and more that he was breaking ties, that people had to, the outer connections had been established only so that there could be an inner connection, and now the outer connections needed to be dropped so that the inner connections could be emphasized and strengthened. And he said that at the time when he was throwing away his alphabet board and all that sort of thing. So that's just another way to reflect on the new life. And then, as I said, the metaphor, the idea of the new life as being a metaphor for death and rebirth, or in other words, for reincarnation. And there's a lot of I'm going to read some quotes, both from Baba and from some of the companions, that just hint at that sort of thing. So Baba said, quote, "Those who come with me," this is before the new life, he says, "those who come with me should consider themselves already dead, just as a corpse has no material connections or concern with anyone or anything and asks no questions and needs no provisions. Even so, those accompanying me will have to be with me as corpses. I am going to see who is out to die for no particular reason by going with me." And he insisted, don't think this is for spiritual benefit. And you had to sign papers, no spiritual benefit, and if anything happens, Bob is not responsible. It's like a legal document saying, nope, not me. And everybody was like, sign me up. I don't care. I want to go anyways. So you have to wonder what kind of a personality, what kind of a love connection do you have with a person that makes you do that. So Baba reiterated, this is another little further down in the book, he reiterated on another occasion that those accompanying him should consider themselves dead to everything, like corpses which remain unaffected by the world and its affairs, neither questioning nor wanting anything. And another quote, this is still later in the new life, he says, "We have left the old life behind us, and now there is no going back. It is practically dead." And when he says practically, he doesn't mean almost. We say practically meaning almost. He means in the practical sense, it is dead. The old life is dead in the practical sense. Our old life has been dead since October 16th, 1949. And then all of it, this is one of the companions talking about the new life, all of us said, if in the new life, someone asked him, gee, what was it like? Was it hard in the new life? And all of us said, if in the new life you were willing to become a dead man, the life was easy. But if there was anything in this world you held on to, the new life was a tremendous suffering. And then Erich says, "Baba gave us to understand that once we set out on the new life, it would never end, and that we had to turn our backs on our relatives, wives, children, homes, and all." And this is in an interview with Don Stevens. This is from the Tales of the New Life book. And Don says, "For the rest of your lives?" Erich says, "For the rest of our lives." He told us we wouldn't even have the opportunity again to see our old life companions, the old life mandali, our relatives, friends, and Baba lovers. We were to completely turn our backs on the world, seeking a life of helplessness and hopelessness in the companionship of Baba himself. Now, and if you think about it, that is what happens when there is no going back when you drop the body. If you're going into another life, whatever, I believe Baba, whatever he says, but I don't have any personal experience. But if you go on to another life, you certainly have no connection with the old life. And it's completely cut off, and that is the way he treated this particular phase of his life. He did end it, but he wanted everyone to take it very, very, and he had to, people were so used to Baba, you know, doing kind of Zen shocking tricks to them. He had, during the meetings, he was saying, no, you have to, I'm being very serious. You have to remember this is very, very serious. I'm not joking, I'm not kidding. And as he began selling off all of these things and divesting himself of everything, people, it had a huge effect on people, as you can well imagine. So having no contact, as I say, with those in the old life, as I said, is very much like this idea of not being in the body anymore. So just to kind of conclude and to wrap all that up, and I hope if you like, have any reflections of your own, if you have any questions or thoughts, we'll have a little discussion when I'm done. But I just want to say kind of what we've looked at, and this is just barely scratching the surface of the new life. As you can see, I kind of raced through a bunch of things that really deserve a lot more time. But so we've looked at some ways to approach looking at Meher Baba's life and work. We've looked at some ways to approach the function of Meher Baba's new life work in the context of his life and work. And we've kind of surveyed some of the bare bones, concrete facts of Meher Baba's new life. With all of that, as I say, we barely scratched the surface, but I hope at least we've made a start and to kind of introduce ourselves, reintroduce in many cases ourselves to the new life. And I hope it encourages people to kind of dig through some of these books. As I say, I listed some of them, Bao's book, Meher Baba's New Life, and the sections in Lord Meher. There's the chapter in The God-Man. There's the wonderful Tales of the New Life. And there's many, many, I'm sure on YouTube and elsewhere, there's many, many oral history project things of Erich telling stories of the new life. But opening ourselves up to that, I feel, spending as much time as we can trying to fathom its significance can do nothing but be helpful. So, thank you all.